No one wants to marry me. I need a husband, said the Apache woman as she begged the cowboy. The morning sun rose slowly over the wide, open plains of Arizona. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, and the air smelled fresh with the scent of dry grass and earth. Jacob, a cowboy who had spent many years riding the trails with his herd of cattle, was already awake. He had learned to rise with the sun because life on the plains was not easy. Every day brought new challenges, finding water for the cattle, keeping them safe from wild animals, and making sure they did not stray too far. Jacob was a man of few words. People in the small towns nearby knew him as calm and dependable, someone who always kept a steady hand even when things went wrong. He was used to being alone, and the open land had become his closest friend. That morning, as he rode along the dry riverbed, Jacob noticed something unusual. Near the edge of a small creek, a young woman was sitting alone. She had long, dark hair that shone in the sunlight, and her eyes looked sad, almost lost. Her clothes were simple but neat, showing that she cared about herself despite the hardships she faced. Jacob slowed his horse and watched her for a moment. This far from the Apache village, this far from the settlement, especially alone. Most villagers stayed within the safety of their community, keeping close to family and friends. Curiosity drew Jacob closer, but he also felt caution. He had learned long ago that approaching someone unexpectedly could lead to misunderstandings, especially in a place where different cultures and traditions met. As he neared her, the woman looked up. There was a mix of hope and fear in her expression, as if she had been waiting for anyone, to notice her. "Hello," Jacob said softly, careful not to startle her. "Are you all right?" She looked at him, then down at her hands, wringing them nervously. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was clear, but it carried a weight that made Jacob stop in his tracks. "No one... Nah, one wants to marry me," she said. Her words were simple, but they carried the pain of someone who had felt rejected for a long time. I need a husband. Can you help me?" The request was unusual, direct, and a little surprising.
He had never been asked for such help before, especially not by someone he had just met.
But looking at her, he felt something stir inside him. It was not just sympathy. It was a quiet recognition that this young woman was in trouble and needed guidance. I don't know if I can do that," he said slowly. "But I can listen. Maybe I can help in some other way." She hesitated, then nodded.
Her eyes shone with a flicker of hope. "Please, I don't know who else to ask," she said.
"Everyone in my village, they refuse. They say I am too young, too different, or not ready." I don't want to stay alone forever." Jacob dismounted from his horse and approached her carefully. He could see that she was not just sad. She was frightened. Life in the village could be harsh for a woman who did not fit the usual expectations. Marriages were often arranged, and the opinions of family and community leaders mattered more than personal choice. The woman, whose name he would later learn was Nita, had dreams and thoughts of her own, but the world around her seemed to close doors rather than open them.
"Sit with me for a moment," Jacob said, patting the ground near the creek.
"Tell me what happened." Nita hesitated, then slowly sat down, keeping her hands folded in her lap. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier as she went on. She told Jacob about her life in the village, how she had grown up learning to cook, sew, and care for the younger children, but how she had also dreamed of more. She wanted to see the world beyond the hills, to learn new things, to live a life where her choices mattered. But every man her age seemed to avoid her, and every woman in the village seemed to whisper behind her back.
"They say I am not like them," she said softly.
"They say I think too much, that I am too bold, that I will not obey as a wife should. I do not understand. All I want is someone who respects me. Someone who will be my partner, not just my master. Jacob listened quietly. He could feel the truth in her words. He had seen many people judged for being different, for having thoughts and dreams that did not match the expectations of those around them. Nita was brave to speak so openly to him. A stranger. He admired that bravery, even though he did not fully understand the cultural pressures she faced. "You are brave," he said finally. "It takes courage to ask for help like this, to speak your truth even when others do not understand it. That alone shows something about your character." Nita looked at him with wide eyes, as if she had not expected such kindness. "Spida."
You think so?"
she asked. "I do," Jacob said. "But I am not sure I can give you what you want." Finding a husband. That is something I cannot promise. What I can do is help you see your own strength and maybe find a way to show your village that you are worthy of respect. Nita's shoulders relaxed slightly. It was the first time in many months that she had felt someone truly listen to her, not just judge or dismiss her. She nodded slowly, feeling a small spark of hope. I would like that, she said quietly. For the next few hours they sat by the creek. Jacob asked questions about her daily life, her family, and her dreams. Nita told stories about her childhood, about the games she played with her siblings, and the times she had explored the hills near the village. She spoke of her sadness when other children excluded her, and of her longing for a life where she could choose her own path. Jacob shared some stories too, about life on the trail, about the dangers of the open plains, and the loneliness that often came with being a cowboy. He did not speak much about his past, but he gave enough that Nita could see he understood hardship, loss, and the feeling of being an outsider. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Nita began to smile. It was small at first, a flicker of light across her face, but it grew steadily. She laughed softly at some of Jacob's stories, and he smiled in return. For a moment, the worries of the village, the pressure of marriage, and the fear of being alone all seemed to fade. Jacob noticed that Nita was strong, not just in body but in mind and spirit. Despite the challenges she faced, she had not given up. She had come to him not out of weakness, but because she was determined to find a solution, to take control of her life in any way she could. "Life is not easy," Jacob said, as they both stood up to return to their horses. "But sometimes the hardest part is finding someone who will help you see your own strength." "I think I understand now. Maybe I can find a way to change things for myself."
Jacob nodded. He did not know what the future held, but he felt certain that Nita would not give up.
She was too strong, too brave, and too determined to let the world decide her fate. And as he mounted his horse and rode away, he could not help but feel a quiet respect for the young Apache woman who had asked for help so openly and honestly. That morning marked the beginning of an unexpected friendship. Two people from different worlds had met by chance, and in that meeting they had found understanding and respect. Jacob returned to his trail, thinking about the courage it took for someone to speak their truth. Nita returned to the creek, feeling a small but steady hope in her heart. The plains stretched wide and endless around them, full of challenges and opportunities alike, and for the first time in a long while Nita felt ready to face them. Bears. Little did they know, that brief meeting by the creek would change both their lives in ways they could not yet imagine. Nita would begin a journey of self-discovery, learning how to stand strong in the face of judgment. while Jacob would learn that helping someone find their own power could be more rewarding than any adventure he had faced on the plains. And so, the day passed with the sun climbing high, casting long shadows across the dry earth. The creek gurgled quietly. The wind whispered through the grass, and two strangers, connected by fate, took the first steps on a path neither had expected, but both would remember forever. After their first meeting by the creek, Jacob could not stop thinking about the young Apache woman. There was something about Nita's courage that lingered in his mind. He had met many people in his years on the plains, but few spoke so honestly about their lives, fears, and hopes. Prank. Something inside him told him that she needed more than just a passing gesture of kindness. She needed guidance, a friend, and someone who could help her see her own strength. The next morning, Jacob returned to the same spot near the creek. He found Nita already there, collecting water in a small wooden bucket. She looked up when she saw him approach. There was a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but also relief. It seemed she had hoped he might return. "Oh, you came back," she said quietly, almost as if testing whether it was real. "I did," Jacob replied, dismounting from his horse. "I wanted to see how you are doing. And maybe I can help in small ways." Nita's shoulders relaxed slightly. I would like that," she said. "I do not know what I can do alone." Over the next several days, Jacob and Nita spent more time together. Jacob showed her how to track small animals for food, how to find safe water in hidden pockets of the plains, and how to read the land for signs of danger. Nita watched carefully and asked many questions, eager to learn. She was quick and clever, and Jacob began to realize that she had a sharp mind that could solve problems better than many men he knew. While they worked, they also shared stories. Nita spoke of her life in the Apache village, of her family, and of the pressures she faced from elders and peers. She explained how every woman in the village seemed to know her place and follow it, but she had always felt a different calling. She wanted a life of choice, not just obligation. Wanted to meet someone who would respect her, not just see her as a duty to be fulfilled. Jacob listened, nodding quietly.
"It is not easy to go against the expectations of others," he said. "But the first step is knowing your own heart."
"If you do not understand what you want, how can anyone else?" Nita considered this. I think I understand," she said slowly.
"I want respect. I want someone who can be my equal, someone who will care for me, but also listen to me."
"That is very wise," Jacob replied. "Many people forget that respect is more important than anything else. It is what makes a relationship strong." Days turned into weeks, and a routine developed. Nita would wake early to gather water or check the small garden she had started with Jacob's guidance. Jacob would teach her skills that were unusual for women in her village, tying knots to secure cattle, spotting signs of wild animals from a distance, and even how to read the clouds and the wind for weather changes. She learned quickly, often surprising Jacob with her cleverness and determination. Through these lessons, Jacob also noticed small changes in Nita. Best. She laughed more freely. Her eyes shone brighter and her movements became confident and deliberate. The sadness that had weighed her down during their first meeting was slowly lifting. Each small success, catching a rabbit, finding water in a hidden spring, even building a small shelter, gave her more confidence in herself. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, Jacob and Nita rested under the shade of a large mesquite tree. They had spent the entire day practicing tracking and setting small traps for rabbits. Nita's hands were scratched and dirty, but she smiled proudly as she showed Jacob her catch.
"You did very well today," Jacob said, handing her a clean cloth to wipe her hands. "You are learning fast."
"I never thought I could do these things," she admitted. In the village, they say a woman should not do such work. They say it is only for men. But, Bess, I enjoy it. It makes me feel strong. Strength is not just about muscles. It is about mind, courage, and heart. You have all of these, Nita.
You just needed to see it for yourself. Nita looked at him thoughtfully.
I think I understand now. I do not need to beg for someone to marry me. I need to become someone who is respected, someone who is strong and wise. Then, maybe, someone will see me differently. Jacob smiled. He could see the change in her, not just in skill, but in spirit. She was beginning to realize that the power to change her life was within herself. He felt a quiet pride, not because he had taught her, but because she had taken those lessons and made them her own. As days passed, their bond grew stronger. They shared meals, stories, and moments of quiet reflection. Nita told Jacob about the games she had played as a child, the songs her mother sang, and the lessons she had learned from her elders. Jacob shared tales of his travels, the challenges he had faced with cattle drives, and the quiet loneliness that sometimes accompanied life on the trail. Through these conversations, they began to understand each other better. Jacob learned that Nita's boldness was not defiance, but a desire for freedom and fairness. Nita realized that Jacob's calm demeanor was not indifference, but a deep respect for the world and the people in it. They began to trust each other, not just as teacher and student, but as friends who could rely on one another. One morning, as a soft mist rolled over the plains, Nita expressed her fears openly. "Jacob, sometimes I am afraid," she said. "Afraid that no one will ever understand me, that I will be alone forever." "It is natural to be afraid," he said gently. "But fear is only a shadow."
It is not real unless you let it control you. You are not alone, Nita.
You have friends, and you have your own strength. That is more than many people have.
Bust. Nita nodded, feeling the truth of his words. She realized that for the first time in her life she did not feel entirely helpless. She had someone who believed in her, who encouraged her to see her own worth. And slowly, the seed of confidence began to grow into a small flame of hope. As the weeks went by, Nita's transformation became visible to anyone who observed her. She carried herself with more confidence, spoke her mind respectfully, and showed care not only for herself but for others in small, thoughtful ways. Jacob noticed that she was no longer just a young woman seeking help. She was becoming a person who could guide, teach, and inspire. The Apache villagers began to notice too. Some were curious, some were skeptical, but a few quietly admired her determination. It was unusual for a woman to step so boldly into new roles, and even the elders began to whisper about her growing independence.
Nita, however, did not seek approval from anyone but herself. She had learned that true respect begins from within.
One evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of orange and the first stars appeared, Jacob and Nita sat by the creek once more. The day had been long, filled with lessons and laughter, and both were tired but content. Nita leaned back, looking at the sky, and spoke softly. "Jacob, I think I'm changing," she said. "Not just in what I can do, but in how I feel about myself. I feel stronger, braver, and happier than I have in a long time." Jacob smiled, pleased by her words. "That is the most important change of all," he said. "Skills and strength are good, but understanding your own heart, that is what truly makes you powerful."
Nita nodded, feeling the weight of his words.
Breath. She realized that her journey was just beginning. But she no longer felt afraid. She had guidance, friendship, and a growing belief in her own abilities. And she knew that with patience and courage, she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. That night, As they parted to sleep under the wide open sky, Nita felt a calm sense of purpose. She had begun to see herself not as someone who begged for help, but as someone capable of shaping her own future. Jacob rode off a little way to set up his own camp, glancing back at Nita with a quiet sense of pride. He had not changed her life for her. She had changed it herself. But he had helped her see that the power was there all along. And so, life continued on the plains. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities. Nita grew stronger, braver, and more confident. Jacob remained a steady guide and friend, offering wisdom and encouragement whenever it was needed. Together, they began a journey that neither had expected, a journey of trust, growth, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the greatest change comes from within, guided by someone who sees your true worth. By the end of this part of their story, it was clear that Nita was no longer the frightened, unsure girl who had sat by the creek weeks earlier. She had become someone ready to face her village, her future, and the world with courage and hope. And Jacob, quiet and steady, had learned that helping someone discover their own strength could be one of life's greatest rewards. After weeks of learning and growing with Jacob, Nita began to feel a change inside her. She no longer thought of herself as weak or helpless. The skills Jacob had taught her, the ability to track animals, gather water, and read the land, had given her confidence, but it was something more than that. She had begun to see herself as capable of making her own choices and facing the challenges of life with courage. One morning, as the sun rose slowly over the hills, Nita decided to visit her village. She had avoided it for weeks, worried about the whispers and judgment she might face, but now she felt ready. With Jacob's guidance, she had learned to carry herself with quiet strength. Back some food she had prepared herself, tied her long hair back, and began the walk toward her people. As she approached the village, Nita noticed the familiar sounds of morning activity, the clatter of cooking pots, the chatter of children, and the low hum of women working on their crafts.
Her heart beat faster, but she did not falter.
She stepped into the center of the village with her head held high, feeling every eye on her. Some villagers looked surprised, others curious, and a few even skeptical. For a moment, Nita felt the old fear creep back, but she took a deep breath and reminded herself of what Jacob had taught her. Strength, he had said, came from within. Respect was earned through actions, not words. But she had skills, courage, and determination now, and she would not let judgment stop her. Nita began helping where she could, offering to carry water for the women, mend clothes, and tend children. At first, people watched her with suspicion. They had known her as a quiet, unsure girl who had begged for help. Now she moved with confidence, spoke with calm authority, and showed knowledge of things that many in the village had never seen her do before. Slowly, the villagers began to take notice. One afternoon, while helping her mother with cooking, a young woman whispered to another, "Look at her. She moves with purpose now. Different." Nita overheard the words, but did not let them affect her. Narration. She smiled quietly, understanding that she was different, not in a way to shame her, but in a way that made her strong. Jacob continued to visit, bringing small lessons and encouragement. He watched Nita from a distance as she interacted with the villagers, proud of how she was asserting herself. "You see," he said one day, "strength and wisdom are noticed by others, even if they are slow to admit it." Nita nodded. "I feel it too," she said.
I am not the same girl who asked for a husband. I
am learning to choose for myself." With each passing day, Nita's skills and confidence grew. She began to organize small tasks for the younger girls, teaching them how to gather herbs safely, mend simple tools, and observe the patterns of the land. Some of the older women initially frowned, unsure why she was stepping into these roles, but her calm patience and helpful nature won them over. Even the men of the village began to notice. They had often dismissed her before, thinking of her as too quiet or too uncertain. Now they saw a young woman who could think clearly, act decisively, and contribute meaningfully to the community. Her transformation was quiet but undeniable, and it did not go unnoticed.
One day, while Nita was helping with the preparation of food for a small village gathering, a young man named Taye approached her.
He had been hesitant in the past, unsure how to approach Nita, but now he felt a spark of curiosity and admiration. "Nita," he said softly, "you have changed." "You are different, in a good way. I would like to know you better." Breaths. Nita looked at him carefully. She remembered the old fear she had felt, of being rejected, of being powerless. But now she was not afraid. She smiled gently.
Thank you, Ty. I am learning to understand myself.
If we are to know each other, it must be with respect and patience. The young man nodded, impressed by her wisdom and calm confidence.
It was clear that Nita was no longer simply a girl waiting for someone to choose her. She was a young woman who could make choices, set boundaries, and inspire respect. Jacob observed these developments quietly from a distance. He was proud, not because he had taught her, but because she had taken the lessons and applied them with courage and intelligence. Nita's growth was not about him. It was about her realizing her own worth and using it to influence the world around her. Days turned into weeks, and Nita's presence in the village became more and more central. She helped solve disputes between children, offered advice to her peers, and guided younger girls who looked up to her.
Even some of the elders began to see the value of her perspective, realizing that strength and wisdom could come from unexpected places.
One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of orange and purple, Nita sat near the edge of the village, reflecting on her journey. She thought about how frightened she had been when she first met Jacob by the creek, how uncertain she had felt about her future, and how much she had grown since then. Respect her. It was about earning that respect It was about earning that respect through her actions, courage, and wisdom. Jacob joined her, sitting quietly without speaking. They watched the colors shift across the sky, feeling the peace of the moment. Nita turned to him and said, "Jacob, I understand now. I do not need to beg for someone to marry me. I need to become someone who is respected. Someone who can make choices for herself. Death, then the rest will follow." Jacob nodded.
You have learned well, Nita. That is the hardest lesson of all, and you have done it.
You have grown stronger than you realize. Nita smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart. She thought about the young man who had approached her earlier, and about the villagers who now treated her with respect. She understood that the world would not always be easy, but she was no longer afraid. She had guidance, skills, and confidence. Most importantly, she had learned to trust herself. In the days that followed, Nita continued to build her life in the village. She helped with daily chores, guided the younger girls, and assisted anyone who sought her advice. Her reputation grew, and with it came a sense of pride and accomplishment. She no longer felt like an outsider. She had carved her own place in the world not by demanding it, but by proving through her actions that she was capable, wise, and strong. Even Tay, the young man who had approached her, began to show respect in a new way. He asked for her opinions, listened to her advice, and began to understand that a partnership with Nita would not be about control, but about equality and mutual respect. Nita considered his interest thoughtfully. She knew that any choice she made about companionship had to be guided by her own values, not by fear or societal pressure. Jacob continued to visit, offering lessons and encouragement. But increasingly, Nita found that she no longer needed to rely solely on him. She was capable of standing on her own, leading others and making decisions with confidence. She realized that the greatest gift Jacob had given her was not knowledge of the land or survival skills. It was the belief that she could shape her own life, no matter the obstacles. One afternoon, as Nita walked through the village carrying water for the elders, she noticed children playing nearby. They ran to her, laughing and calling her name. She smiled and joined them for a while, feeling the simple joy of being part of a community that had once seemed distant and unwelcoming. She realized that change was possible, not just for herself, but for the entire village. Strength, courage, and kindness could inspire others to see things differently. As the sun set, Nita returned to her small home. She reflected on her journey. The fear and sadness she had felt, the guidance Jacob had offered, and the personal growth she had achieved. She realized that her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. She was no longer a girl begging for help. She was a young woman who had earned respect, built skills, and discovered her own inner strength. Jacob visited one last time before the season changed. They sat together quietly, watching the plains stretch into the horizon. "You have done more than I could have hoped for," he said. "You have learned, grown, and become someone who can guide others. I am proud of you, Nita." Nita smiled, feeling the warmth of accomplishment. "Thank you, Jacob. You helped me see what I could be. I feel ready for whatever comes next." Jacob nodded, knowing that Nita had reached a turning point. She no longer needed to rely on him to guide her. She had become a leader, a teacher, and a young woman confident in her own abilities. And as he rode away into the open plains, he felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that Nita's journey was only beginning, and that she was ready to face the world with courage, wisdom, and hope. The days had grown warmer as spring arrived in the plains, bringing new life to the village and surrounding hills. Flowers bloomed along the riverbanks, and the trees swayed gently in the soft breeze. Nita felt different as she walked through the village that morning, stronger, calmer, and certain of herself in a way she had never been before. She had spent months learning, growing, and proving to herself and others that she was capable. Now the time had come to take the next step in her journey. The village was busy as usual, with women preparing meals, children running and playing, and men tending to horses and tools. Nita's presence was no longer questioned. Villagers smiled and greeted her warmly, some even asking for advice on matters small and large. She moved through the center of the village with a quiet confidence, aware that she had become someone others now looked up to. Even the elders who had once doubted her now nodded in recognition when she passed. They had watched her growth with cautious interest, and now they saw that she had proven herself not through words, but through action. She had learned survival skills, taught others, and approached every challenge with patience and wisdom. She was no longer just a young woman in the village. She was a leader in her own way. One afternoon, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Tai approached Nita again. The young man had been quiet, observing her from afar, learning from her actions, and considering what kind of partner she might want. He had noticed her strength, her fairness, and her ability to face challenges with calm determination. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with respect. "Nita," he said softly, "I have watched you for some time now. You have grown, and you have taught all of us something important. I would like to be with you, if you will allow it." "But I know it must be your choice." Nita paused and looked at him. For a long moment she thought about everything she had learned, everything she had endured, and everything she had achieved. She remembered the fear she had once felt, the fear of being rejected, ignored, or forced into a life she did not want. But that fear had faded. Now she understood the power of choice, respect, and patience. Tai, she said gently, I appreciate your words, and I respect your honesty, but any decision about companionship must come from my heart, not from fear or pressure. I will consider what you say carefully because I now know the value of my own life and choices. Taya nodded, understanding completely. He had learned that Nita's strength was not something to challenge or control, it was something to honor and respect. That evening, Nita spoke with Jacob. He had returned one last time, before he needed to continue his own journey along the plains. They sat by the creek where they had first met, the water sparkling in the golden light of the setting sun.
Jacob, Nita said quietly, I have learned so much from you.
Not only about the land and survival, but about myself. You showed me that I can be strong, that I can choose my own path. And now, I feel ready to decide what comes next. Jacob smiled, pride evident in his eyes. You have grown far beyond what I could have imagined, Nita. But remember, the choices you make must be yours, not anyone else's. That is the true test of strength. Nita nodded. I understand, and I am ready. The next morning, Nita walked to the center of the village with calm certainty. The villagers had gathered for the daily activities, and many looked at her with interest. She addressed them with a voice that was steady, clear, and respectful. I have learned much in the past months, she said. I have learned to care for myself, to guide others, and to face challenges with courage. I know that life is not always easy, but I also know that I am capable of making my own choices. I ask for your respect, not as a request, but as a reflection of the work I have done and the person I have become.
The village was silent for a moment.
Some of the elders exchanged glances, impressed by her courage and composure. Slowly, one of the older women nodded, signaling approval. Others followed, recognizing that Nita had changed and had earned her place through wisdom and action. Even the men of the village acknowledged her strength, and a quiet respect spread among everyone present. Nita turned to Teye, who had been standing nearby waiting patiently. She smiled, knowing that her decision about companionship was now in her own hands. She had considered his words, his actions, and the way he had treated her with respect and patience. And she realized that if she were to choose a partner, it must be someone who honored her strength, not someone who sought to control it. Tai, she said, her voice calm and certain, I have watched you, and I have seen your respect for me and for others. I am ready to take the next step, and I choose to walk forward with you, not because I need a husband, but because I want a partner who values me as I value him. Taya's face lit up with a mix of joy and relief. He stepped closer, bowing his head respectfully. I will honor you, Nita, always, he said. I promise to walk beside you, to listen, and to respect your choices. The villagers watched quietly, realizing that Nita had not only chosen a partner, but had also set an example of courage, patience, and self-respect. This was not a story of someone finding a husband. It was a story of someone claiming their own power and making choices based on wisdom, not fear.
Over the next days, the village prepared a small celebration to honor Nita's accomplishments and her new partnership with Tay.
It was simple, yet heartfelt. Families shared food, sang songs, and spoke of the lessons they had learned from Nita's example. Children looked up to her with admiration, seeing what it meant to be brave, fair, and wise. Nita and Tay spent time together, learning from each other and planning a future based on mutual respect. Nita realized that this partnership was different from anything she had imagined before. It was not about obligation or social expectation. It was about choice, trust, and shared strength. She felt a quiet joy in knowing that she could walk forward into life with someone who truly understood her, while still maintaining her independence and values. Jacob watched from a distance, feeling a quiet satisfaction. He had not changed her life for her, but he had helped her see what was already inside her, the courage, wisdom, and strength that could guide her path. Nita's journey had begun with a plea for help, but it had become a story of transformation, self-discovery, and empowerment. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the stars began to appear, Nita stood near the creek, reflecting on her journey. She thought about how frightened she had once been, how uncertain about her future, and how much she had grown. She realized that true courage was not just about facing danger, but about trusting yourself, making choices, and guiding others through example. She smiled as she looked at the sky, feeling the warmth of the day and the promise of the future. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but she felt ready. She had learned that respect was earned through action, that love and partnership were about equality and trust, and that the most important choice of all was the choice to believe in herself. With Taye by her side and Jacob continuing his journey on the plains, Nita had found her place, not by begging for acceptance or relying on others to make decisions for her, but by proving to herself and everyone around her that she was capable, wise, and strong. And so, Nita's story became one not just of love, but of courage, respect, and empowerment. The Apache woman who had once pleaded for a husband had transformed into a young woman who could lead, teach, and choose her own path. She had faced fear, embraced growth, and earned the respect of her community. And as the plains stretched endlessly around her, Nita walked forward into the future with confidence, hope, and the knowledge that she had the power to shape her own life. The villagers remembered her courage, the younger girls followed her example, and even the elders quietly admired the wisdom she had shown. Nita had proven that strength comes not from demand, but from action, courage, and heart, and in that, she had truly found herself, her voice, and her place in the world.